You don't ignore your bank account because you're irresponsible. You ignore it because it changes how you feel. There's a small shift that happens the moment you open the app. Your chest tightens slightly, your breathing shortens, your brain starts calculating before you consciously decide to. So sometimes you don't open it, not because you don't care, but because you care too much. You tell yourself you'll check tomorrow, you'll sit down this weekend, you'll finally make a plan when things feel calmer. But later keeps moving, and in the meantime, you function. You pay what's urgent, you swipe when necessary, you avoid looking too closely at the full picture. From the outside, it looks like disorganization. From the inside, it feels like self-protection. Because money isn't just numbers, it's identity. It's proof of progress, proof of competence, proof that you're where you should be. And if there's even a small fear that the numbers won't match the story you tell yourself, avoidance feels safer than confirmation. So you delay, you postpone, you scroll instead. Not because you're bad with money, but because you don't want the feeling that might come with facing it. And here's the part most people never admit out loud. The anxiety isn't about being broke, it's about being exposed. Stay with me, because what feels like financial weakness might actually be emotional defense, and defense isn't solved with discipline, it's solved with understanding. Your brain doesn't avoid money because it's irrational. It avoids it because uncertainty triggers threat response. When you don't know exactly where you stand financially, your nervous system anticipates danger. It fills the gap with worst-case scenarios. If it's worse than I think, what if I messed up? What if I should be further by now? Opening the bank app isn't just opening numbers, it's opening evaluation. And evaluation activates shame faster than logic. So your brain chooses something simple. Delay the exposure. Not permanently, just for now, just until you feel stronger, just until there's good news instead of tension. The problem is that avoidance lowers short-term anxiety but increases long-term pressure. Every day you don't look, the uncertainty grows slightly. The story in your head becomes louder than the reality on the screen. You imagine the number being worse than it is, or sometimes better, which creates a different kind of fear, responsibility. Because if it's better than you thought, now you have to decide what to do with it. Avoidance keeps you in limbo. Limbo feels uncomfortable, but it avoids confrontation. This isn't immaturity, it's regulation. Your nervous system is choosing temporary calm over uncomfortable clarity. And the more stressed your life feels overall, the more tempting that temporary calm becomes. Which means the worse things feel, the harder it becomes to look. And the harder it becomes to look, the more power the numbers gain over you. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're unseen. Over time, something subtle happens. You stop saying, I haven't checked. You start saying, I'm just bad with money. That shift is dangerous because now it's not a behavior, it's a label. If you're bad with money, then avoidance feels justified. Planning feels pointless. Budgeting feels like something other people do. The label protects you from trying because trying risks confirming the fear. Think about this. If someone asked you right now exactly how much you spent last month, could you answer confidently? If not, does that make you incapable or just disengaged? Most people who avoid money aren't reckless, they're anxious. They don't overspend wildly, they operate in fragments, paying urgent bills, handling immediate needs, never zooming out enough to see the whole picture, because zooming out feels overwhelming. The irony is that avoidance creates the exact instability you fear. When you don't look, you assume the worst. When you assume the worst, you delay. When you delay, you lose clarity. And without clarity, every financial decision feels heavier, so you avoid again. That loop doesn't make you irresponsible, it makes you human under pressure. And pressure doesn't get solved by shame, it gets solved by reducing threat. Which means the solution isn't forcing yourself to be better, it's learning how to look without attacking yourself in the process. Let's bring this into something real. Imagine someone earning $4,900 per month, not struggling dramatically, not wealthy, just normal. They suspect their credit card balance is around $2,000. They haven't checked in 3 weeks. When they finally open the app, it's $3,180. Not catastrophic, not ruinous, but higher than the story they were telling themselves. That's the moment the chest tightens, because the pain isn't the number, it's the gap between perception and reality. Avoidance protects you from that gap. If you don't look, the number stays hypothetical. Hypothetical feels manageable. Specific feels final. And here's what almost always happens. The number you feared is rarely as catastrophic as your imagination made it, but because you waited, it feels heavier than it needed to. Now, imagine the same person checking weekly. The balance would have climbed gradually, 2100, 2450, 2780, each increase smaller, each adjustment possible. Avoidance doesn't create disaster overnight. It creates accumulation without awareness. And awareness, even when uncomfortable, reduces intensity. When you finally look, you feel exposed, not because the number is huge, but because you avoided it, and that self-judgment hits harder than the math. The tragedy isn't the 3180, it's the 3 weeks of quiet stress leading up to seeing it. That's the real cost of not looking. Here's the part nobody explains clearly. Financial shame is rarely about money, it's about comparison. You think, at my age, I should have more saved. I should be more organized. I should understand this better. That word should is heavier than any bill, because once money becomes a measurement of maturity, opening your bank app feels like opening a report card, and nobody likes checking grades they're unsure about, so you delay. But here's what's quietly true. Delaying doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you attached your self-worth to a number. And when identity is at risk, the nervous system defends. If you separate the number from the identity, something shifts. $3,180 isn't proof you're irresponsible. $1,200 in savings isn't proof you're behind. They're data points, and data only hurts when it's tied to character. Most people who avoid money aren't afraid of math. They're afraid of what the math might say about them. That's why yelling at yourself to be disciplined never works. Discipline increases pressure. Pressure increases avoidance. Avoidance increases shame. The loop tightens. Breaking it requires something different, not force, but distance. Distance between who you are and what the numbers show, because once money stops being identity, it becomes manageable again.
Most financial advice assumes the solution is willpower. Track everything, face your numbers, be accountable, and while those ideas sound strong, they ignore something critical. Exposure without safety increases avoidance. If every time you look at your finances you attack yourself, your brain will avoid the experience next time. It's simple conditioning. Pain equals avoid. So instead of saying, I need to get serious, try something different. Lower the emotional stakes. Open your bank app without making decisions, just observe. No fixing, no planning, no judgment. 5 minutes, that's it. Because the goal isn't optimization, it's desensitization. The more neutral the experience becomes, the less threat your brain attaches to it. And when threat drops, clarity rises naturally. Here's the quiet truth. You don't need to become better with money overnight. You need to become safer around it. If this is resonating, pause here for a second. Notice whether your resistance is about the numbers or about the feeling of seeing them. That awareness alone changes the direction of the entire cycle. And in the next part, we'll talk about what happens when looking stops being scary and starts becoming stabilizing. Because once the fear softens, the structure can finally change. If avoidance is a defense mechanism, then the solution isn't aggression, it's safety. Here's the first step most people skip because it sounds too simple. Don't fix your finances, name them. Instead of I'm bad with money, say my checking balance is $1,420. Instead of I'm drowning in debt, say my credit card is $3,180. Specific, neutral, factual. No adjectives, no conclusions. Your nervous system reacts less to facts than to identity attacks. When you remove the story, the body relaxes slightly. That small relaxation is what allows change. Try this. Once per week, same day, same time, open your accounts and write the numbers down. Not to correct them, not to optimize, just to see them. Exposure without punishment. You're retraining your brain to associate visibility with safety instead of shame. And something subtle happens when you do this consistently. The numbers stop feeling like enemies. They start feeling like coordinates. Coordinates don't judge you, they just tell you where you are. And once you know where you are, movement becomes possible. Not dramatic movement, not overnight transformation, but direction. Most people want confidence before they look, but confidence doesn't come before clarity. It comes after repeated, calm exposure. And that's what we're building here. Not discipline, but tolerance. After a few weeks of neutral exposure, something shifts. You open your bank app and your heart doesn't spike. You see a number and instead of panic, you feel information. That change sounds small, it's not. Because when fear drops, thinking improves. When thinking improves, decisions stabilize. Let's say you notice your monthly fixed expenses are $4,250 and your income is $4,900. Before, that gap felt like threat. Now it feels like a calculation. $650 of margin, not huge, but real. And when it's real, it becomes workable. Instead of "I'm terrible with money," it becomes "if I lower this subscription and adjust this plan, I create $120 more room." Room, that word matters. Avoidance keeps everything abstract. Clarity makes it adjustable. And here's something surprising. When you stop avoiding, your spending often stabilizes naturally. Not because you forced yourself, but because awareness regulates behavior. When you see your balance weekly, impulse decisions lose their emotional power. You don't need to clamp down, you just become conscious. And consciousness feels calmer than control. This is the moment most people realize something profound. They were never bad with money, they were just scared of looking. Let's be very clear about something. Avoidance is not laziness, it's protection. At some point, money became emotionally loaded. Maybe you grew up around financial stress. Maybe you made a mistake once and judged yourself harshly. Maybe you compared yourself to someone further ahead and felt behind. Your brain connected money with threat, and when something feels threatening, we avoid it. That's human. But here's the shift that changes everything. Protection that made sense before might not be necessary now. You're not the same person you were when avoidance started. You're more capable, more aware, more stable. And when you approach money without attack, without shame, without identity tied to the number, something surprising happens. It becomes boring. And boring is powerful, because boring means neutral. Neutral means safe. Safe means sustainable. If this feels different from the financial advice you're used to, that's intentional, because we're not fixing behavior, we're redesigning your relationship with the thing that triggers it. And in the final part, we'll talk about what financial stability actually feels like when shame is no longer running the system. Here's the truth most people never hear. You were never bad with money. You were overwhelmed by what it represented. Money represented comparison, responsibility, identity, proof. And when something carries that much meaning, it stops being a number, it becomes emotional. But when you separate identity from data, something powerful happens. Money becomes manageable, not because you earn more, not because you become stricter, but because you're no longer avoiding it. Financial strength isn't intensity, it's neutrality. It's opening your account and feeling calm. It's knowing your numbers without attaching a story to them. It's adjusting your structure without attacking yourself in the process. Most people try to fix money by increasing effort, but effort without safety leads to burnout. Structure without shame leads to stability. This channel isn't about guilt, it's not about hustle, it's not about pretending money is purely logical. It's about understanding the psychology behind it, so you can change the system gently and permanently. If this helped you see your situation with more compassion instead of criticism, subscribe, not for pressure, but for clarity. Because once you stop fighting your finances emotionally, you can finally design them structurally. And that's when money stops feeling heavy and starts feeling neutral. That's where real stability begins.